Samarkand once breathed like a living thing. In the early mornings, light slid across blue tiles and rested in courtyards where water whispered to stone. Women moved through narrow streets with baskets on their arms, their steps steady, their thoughts full of small plans. Bread cooled on wooden boards. Children chased dust and laughter. Life felt wide, as if it would never end. The city had learned to trust its walls. They had stood for generations, tall and calm, holding back storms and armies alike. Stories of danger came from far places, carried by traders who spoke softly and then moved on. Here, the days followed one another in familiar ways. Washing, weaving, waiting. The women of Samarkand knew hardship, but it was the kind that could be named and carried. When the rumors became louder, they still felt distant. The Mongols were said to move like wind, to arrive before fear could. Yet the city gates stayed closed, and prayers rose with the smoke of morning fires. The women listened, but they also cooked, cleaned, and sang. The world had taught them that fear could wait. The first sign was the quiet. Birds left the trees. Dogs stopped barking. The air itself seemed to pull inward. From the rooftops, a dark line appeared on the horizon. It did not rush. It simply grew. By the time the bells rang, many already knew that something had ended. When the walls fell, the sound was deep and final. It was not the loud crash that broke the women's hearts, but the long echo that followed. It told them there would be no return to the morning they had known. The city that had felt like a shelter now felt open and exposed. The Mongols entered without ceremony. They did not shout. They did not rush. Their calm was heavier than noise. Streets filled with shadows. Doors were forced open. The women were pulled from familiar rooms into open spaces where the sky felt too wide. Some clutched each other. Some stared ahead. The ground felt cold even under the sun. The women understood, without words, that this was not a moment that would pass. It was the beginning of a long unraveling. That day did not end with nightfall. It stretched on, folding fear into memory. The city fell silent, and in that silence, the women of Samarkand felt something worse than pain. They felt the slow removal of the lives they had built, piece by careful piece. The worst part was not the sound of steel or the sight of ruin. It was the way time lost its shape. Days blurred into one long moment of waiting. The women were gathered, counted, and moved. Not killed, not spared. Simply claimed, as if they were objects left behind after a storm. They were forced to walk beyond the city they loved. Each step away from Samarkand felt heavier than the last. Behind them, smoke rose gently, as if the city were sighing. Ahead, there was only dust and uncertainty. The women did not scream. Many had already learned that sound changed nothing. What was worse than death was the stripping away of choice. Names were no longer spoken. Faces were no longer seen. The women became a group, then a number, then a burden to be managed. Their hands were still their own, but nothing they touched belonged to them anymore. At night, they lay on hard ground and stared at stars that felt unfamiliar. The sky was the same, yet everything beneath it had changed. Some whispered old prayers. Others stayed silent, saving their breath. Memory became both comfort and weight. To remember Samarkand was to feel it ache inside the chest. The Mongols did not need cruelty to break them. Routine did the work. March, stop, wait, move again. Hunger was steady, not sharp. Fear was constant, not sudden. This slow rhythm wore down even the strongest spirits. The women learned to exist inside it, to fold themselves small. Yet even there, something endured. A shared glance. A hand briefly held. A story told in a whisper. These moments were fragile, but they were real. They reminded the women that they were still human, even as the world tried to forget it. Some women chose to stop remembering. Others held on fiercely. Both choices carried pain. To forget was to survive more easily. To remember was to keep a part of Samarkand alive, hidden deep within. What the Mongols did was worse than death because death would have been an ending. This was a stretching of suffering, a long road without a clear horizon. The women were alive, but the life they knew had been taken, quietly and completely. Time, even in captivity, continued to move. Seasons shifted. Cold replaced heat. The women's bodies changed, growing thinner, stronger, quieter. In this slow passing, something unexpected began to form. Not hope, exactly, but endurance. They learned the land as it unfolded before them. They learned the sound of wind in open plains, the taste of unfamiliar water. These were not gifts, but they became tools. Survival was no longer a single effort. It became a practice, repeated daily. Among the women, roles quietly returned. One watched the children. Another remembered paths. Another shared words that eased fear. These small acts rebuilt a sense of self. It was not the Samarkand they had known, but it was something shaped by their hands. The Mongols saw bodies, not bonds. They did not notice the way the women leaned toward each other in the cold, or how a simple song could slow a racing heart. In these unnoticed spaces, the women reclaimed fragments of control. One evening, as the sun lowered itself gently, a woman began to trace patterns in the dust. The shapes were simple, like the tiles of home. Others watched. No one spoke. The pattern disappeared with the wind, but the act remained. It was a reminder that beauty could exist, even briefly. This was the twist the conquerors never planned for. The women did not vanish inside their suffering. They adapted. They changed. They carried Samarkand not as a place, but as a way of seeing. Careful. Quiet. Enduring. Pain did not leave them. Loss did not fade. But alongside it grew a calm strength. Not loud, not defiant, but steady. It lived in breath, in shared silence, in the refusal to become nothing. In this way, what was meant to erase them instead reshaped them. The women were no longer only victims of a fallen city. They were keepers of something that could not be burned or broken. Years later, when the road finally bent away from constant movement, the women stood in a place that was neither home nor prison. Life there was still hard, but it had edges again. Days had beginnings and ends. The world felt smaller, more understandable. Some women were separated. Others stayed together. Each parting carried grief, but also acceptance. They had learned that holding on did not always mean staying close. Sometimes it meant letting go with care. At night, they spoke of Samarkand less often, but with more peace. The city no longer felt like an open wound. It felt like a story passed down, steady and true. The women had become the memory the walls could not keep. What the Mongols had done remained terrible. It had taken years, families, futures. It had forced the women to live in a space worse than death, where life continued without consent. But it had not taken everything. In the quiet moments, when the wind softened and the stars settled into place, the women felt something like rest. Not happiness, not victory, but grounding. They were still here. They still breathed. Their presence itself became an answer to what had been done. The ending was not bright, but it was solid. It held weight and truth. The women of Samarkand did not return to what they had been. They became something else, shaped by loss, guided by endurance. And in that becoming, they found a way to live that did not deny the past, but did not bow to it either. The world moved on. So did they.